Welcome to Steadfast, a pro-life podcast where we talk about how the pro-life movement is evolving and how you can participate. Our goal is to empower you with knowledge of science, philosophy, politics, and theology so that you can go out and lovingly change the world, even if that's just one heart at a time. Our hope is that you'll feel comfortable meeting anyone wherever they are at in this moment, confronting their fears and hurt with love and compassion. I'm your host, Sammie Carroll, Education Coordinator at Life Choices Women's Clinic in Phoenix, Arizona, and our prayer is that this podcast inspires you. Welcome to Steadfast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Steadfast. Today we are talking to Joel Stepanek, who is the Vice President of Parish Services at Life Teen International. He has written books, he has given talks to thousands of teens across the country, and he is just such a blessing and an inspiration to me as a former youth minister and to, just me on a daily basis. And he has such a passion for getting teens to be involved in the pro-life movement and just ultimately to get them to heaven. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Joel Stepanek. Hey, Joel, welcome to Steadfast Podcast.
Hey, Sammie, it's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. I knew that out of anybody to talk to you about how to reach teens, I think that you were my obvious pick.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm actually flattered by that because there are so many people doing really great work with youth ministry right now. And we need it. We need it.
Amen to that. Well, tell us about yourself, what you do for a living, and tell us about your family and how it's growing, and just tell us everything.
I love that. I'll start there. I am married to a woman named Colleen. We have been married for almost 10 years. We celebrate 10 years this year, actually, on September 8th, the Nativity of Mary. Yeah, very soon, which is so cool. And it seems like yesterday and also a million years ago, that we were married. We have 2 children outside of the womb, one getting ready to make his grand entrance. Elijah is 8, Sophia is 6, and Micah James will be with us at the end of August, unless he is stubborn. Then maybe we'll push it into September. We'll see.
Oh, you think he could come late?
Yeah, Sophia, our second, actually was 8 days late.
Oh my gosh.
And then when she was ready to go, she came in like record time.
I did squats.
It was wild.
I was like, you're coming out early. Let's go. And I knew it too. I was like, we're done. Let's go. And they both somewhat cooperated. I guess neither of them really cooperated, but yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that's our family. We live out in Phoenix. We love it out here in the desert. And right now I'm the Vice President of Parish Services at Life Teen. So I serve parishes who are looking to reach young people. The team that I serve helps parishes create sustainable youth ministry and lead teenagers closer to Jesus. So that's been unique work over the past couple of years as the landscape was already shifting, but it's changed a lot more since 2020. And that's been unique and good work to be involved in. I also write, travel around and speak, and I do a little bit of leadership consulting, which I've really enjoyed lately as well. I like to help parishes and nonprofits and religious organizations do their best work. And that comes down to leadership and organizational culture. So,
and communication.
It's all part of it. So
yeah,
I like to do that stuff as well. I've been blessed to get some chances to do that.
That's very much needed. I feel like every parish that I've worked for, I've desired that for them to have somebody come in and be like, let's talk about the organization, communication, and, let's kind of make a efforts together for that. So that's really awesome.
Yeah. Well, and not to get like too off topic, but I mean, like we're talking about pro-life stuff here, but like creating a culture of life. I mean, like in an organizational culture, you have to be intentional about that. And I think people would be dismayed perhaps and scandalized to see how a culture of life often doesn't exist within our religious organizations because we think, oh, that's just baked in, right? And it's not. Like, that's not how organizational culture works. And if you want to build a culture of life, a pro-life culture at a parish, you have to be intentional about that, among other things. But that's my brief rant about that. We could go down that rabbit hole.
Oh, I know. I'm like, another podcast. I think that the best, healthiest staff I've seen actually is the one that had each staff member had a holy hour each week. Mm-hmm. And that one was probably the best staff that I've been a part of. So anyway, this episode is largely geared toward youth ministers, maybe some teachers, and definitely parents. So I think that, a lot of people are going to find this all useful, but many of us grew up in the pro-life movement, but the movement definitely looked different back then than the movement today's teenagers are growing up in, especially after the overturn of Roe v. Wade. So what are some of the key differences?
Yeah, I was thinking about this when Roe versus Wade was overturned with the Dobbs decision. I texted my mom because my mom was a part of the Wisconsin board for Right to Life. She went to the marches and the rallies and did all that stuff when I was young. So like from a young age, I was pretty aware of what we were fighting for, what she was doing, what she was a part of. She shared her experiences with me of those rallies and having people just do demonic things, quite honestly, like, at their worst. And then at, the most benign yelling, insults, spitting, throwing stuff. And so I was aware of it. And I really am grateful for my mom for bringing me up like that. And I think for a lot of us, maybe we had parents like that, or we went to youth conferences where we heard about the pro-life movement and what abortion was, why it was so necessary to oppose that and to be champions of life, especially the most vulnerable life, the child in the womb. And so many of us heard it. My mom would say, and we heard at youth conferences, I remember speakers saying it and my youth minister saying it, one day we'll overturn Roe versus Wade. And there was a period of time there too, I think, where some people were like, well, maybe that's not going to happen. So what's the next phase of this if that becomes codified? And so it was wild that day. And I was sitting in my garage. I was supposed to work out, but I was just on my exercise bike, just pedaling slowly, like refreshing. We're like, I know the decision's coming today. I saw it and I texted my mom. I was the first person to actually tell her, but it was weird because I'm like, wow, like this actually happened. Like we did see that overturned. So I think one of the key differences though is as teens, we were fighting to get something done. Like we're fighting, hey, we've got to overturn this law. And then on the flip side, there was also this, hey, it's legal. So we have to figure out ways that we can support women in these crisis situations so they don't make that choice, right? Mm-hmm. I think the shift now is that young people are going to experience a much different kind of rhetoric than we did. So even for us, when we were teenagers or young people, because we weren't on the side of the law, essentially, like we were saying, hey, this is not okay. This shouldn't be legal. But it was legal. People weren't like, there wasn't the same opposition I think that young people are going to get. But now, I mean, there's going to be vehement opposition where before, as a teen, I could be like, yeah, I'm pro-life. And people are like, okay, that's your opinion, whatever. Mm-hmm. Don't force it on me. And you know what? You can't because it's legal. So that's how arguments would end. It's legal. So you can think what you want, but it's legal. But now if somebody says I'm pro-life, it's you're repressive. You are hurting women. You are hurting people. You are ancient. You are out of touch. You are out of sync. And so I think it's going to be actually harder for teenagers to be pro-life over the next couple of years because of the blowback they will get. And I think that's one of the key differences. It was hard when we were young, but now it's going to be very difficult because of the side of the law that they're on.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this question, and I was thinking about kind of like the flip where I feel like when we were growing up, I kind of associated the pro-life movement with a bit more aggression, like where we're going to stand with our posters and we're going to like be kind of have to be heard, like I feel like it was kind of we had a fight to be heard, I guess, especially since it was legal. Whereas now I'm like, we have to become more humble and quiet about it. Almost not quiet, like we need to be speaking up, obviously, but I mean, we need to change our rhetoric where it's more of a gentle, let's talk about this and have a loving, compassionate, merciful conversation.
Yeah, I think it's leaning into aspects of the pro-life movement that have always been there, that have been there for the past 50 years of the people who are like, okay, maybe they weren't called to the legislative side of it as much as some people were. And we've needed those people who have been advocates and who are in law and who understand. I mean, all of that went into this decision. Mm-hmm. But there have been people also who have been like, okay, like what I'm called to, I don't know a lot about that. I will vote for it. I'll vote in favor of people who will support this. But what I'm called to do is run the crisis pregnancy centers and run the sidewalk counseling and walk with women through this. And that's where I'm going to lean in. And I think we have to lean into that side of the movement, which is not something we're used to, because like you said, it's always been there, but our posture is going to have to be one where we really emphasize compassion. And not that we haven't, we certainly have, but that we really bring that to the forefront, because the picture that's being painted is these old men are trying to control women's bodies, and they don't care about the child or the woman. And that could not be further from the truth. It's so monolithic and wrong, but I agree with you. We have to emphasize that facet of this diamond of the pro-life movement.
We've also been told, oh, you're just pro-baby. And I think that one of the things that I've seen over just the past couple of months is the switch to focusing on the mom, because that's the pro-choicers' concerns. And like, of course, we know that we've always been concerned about the mom, but I think even just the tactics of how we talk to pro-choice people, I've seen a lot of people kind of, okay, sure, let's focus on the mom. Let's talk about why this isn't going to be good for her. And so I think that is also another key difference. So Gen Z, as we've established, is very different as a whole than millennials and Gen X. But what are some key differences, and how do they impact the ways that we share a pro-life message with them?
Yeah, I think Gen Z is profoundly empathetic, which is really good. Praise God for that. I think there was a cynicism among Gen Xers. There was not I don't want to say narcissism or entitlement with millennials. And that, again, the generation talk is a whole different thing, right?
Yeah.
But I think millennials very much had a hero mentality, which was good too. But it could leave people behind, I think, sometimes. And a millennial be like, I'm the hero, I'm the protagonist of the story. And so if you're not on board with that, you gotta hop off. And I think what's unique about Gen Z is that they are empathetic and they desire for people to be cared for. And I think in that's where the fight happens, and why we have to help a young person understand what the pro-life movement stands for, and how to, and you had said it before, how do we live that compassion for the mother and the child, love them both. Because if we don't, that is definitely going to be a tactic that the other side, the pro-abortion side, is going to use. And you already cited it, of like, well, what about this? What about this? And like situations that play on the compassion, which we do, we of course do as well. But people have to know how to treat those situations. So this summer, I have been traveling and speaking at youth conferences, and one of the workshops that I talk about deals with pro-life issues. I talked about three things. I talked about abortion, racism, and euthanasia. I think euthanasia, just as a side note, is going to become a bigger issue in the next 10 or 15 years. We have so many baby boomers. You'll hear it. You're going to hear that in the United States. But afterwards, so many questions came in about abortion, and they were all questions of relationship and compassion. What about cases of rape and incest? What about, ectopic pregnancy? What about when a mother's life is in danger? One guy was like, what if like a mother's in poverty and all of those things. None of them had to do with rights. They all had to do with like the person, and how do we love the person? How do we have compassion in this moment? I think that those are key pieces with Gen Z, that if you can help them understand what's happening here, help them understand the philosophy of life, the breadth of the pro-life movement, that it's not just a theistic movement. There are atheist pro-lifers, that suddenly they'll be like, oh, the compassionate thing is to defend life at its most vulnerable. And in doing so, we also serve moms. And, and by the way, like, to get teens asking, because they're active, they want to promote social change, to say, well, why don't you look into how much your state funds crisis pregnancy centers? You should look into what your politicians voted for as far as funding for women who are in crisis situations, or single mothers, or people in the lower socioeconomic strata. What are we doing for them? And I think you'll find that perhaps it's not adding up, and that's anything we can lobby for and put our efforts into.
I think also they are so receptive to the science behind it.
Mhm.
where you can convince them just on that. And I keep on saying this where I'm like, it's not a religious argument. I mean, there's definitely that aspect. And there's a reason why Catholics have been really the forefront, leaders of the pro-life movement for a long time. But we have the science, we have the technology, and I think that will change their hearts. But I do love that about the Gen Z generation, that they will rally. And if they rallied for the pro-life movement, it would be such a game changer. Like they have so much like you said, empathy and but passion. They want a cause to rally behind.
Yeah. And that's a great note, because I think the science piece is key. Um, because it's science versus rights. And my civics teacher used to say, your rights end where the rights of another person begin. So it really is that debate. But a lot of young people do not know that. They're caught up in Twitter, Instagram, TikTok rhetoric.
Oh man, the misinformation that's spreading. I've been trying to post a lot of neutral things. Like anybody who knows me knows where I stand, but I've been trying just to give information, just to try to give people peace, because people just don't know. So what are some of the challenges, speaking of a challenge, misinformation, what are some of the challenges we face in promoting the church's teaching on pro-life issues with these young people? And are there any tactics that we should avoid because they could really backfire?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One of the challenges that we will face is, and you mentioned it earlier, the idea that, oh, you're only pro baby. And I think that that's a real, the reason why that's a pervasive argument, especially for young people, is young people value authenticity, especially Gen Z. Like they want authentic people because they've seen so much inauthenticity, especially from adults, from church leaders, from politicians, from celebrities. Like every single day, it seems like there's one other person like, hey, remember you thought this person was great? Up, they're not. And so they're asking that same authenticity from the church, and authenticity for them is consistency across the board. So one question I got asked in this workshop talking about euthanasia: doesn't really make sense that Catholics are so pro-life when I know so many Catholics who support the death penalty. Okay, you're right. That's an incongruency. Like it is. And teenagers will spot that. And I think, unfortunately, there are times that we let our politics align a little bit, drive our pro-life perspective a little bit more than they ought to. And that doesn't mean that we can't ask questions and dig into some things. But I think when a teenager sees somebody speaking vehemently about pro-life issues and then posting, and again, these are just pieces of things I've seen, not an indictment of the movement at all, but I think people are flawed. So people see something like, people are posting pro-life, anti-abortion stuff, which we need to be vocal advocates about that. And then they post something that is not even like neutral or a non-post, but like a thing about how racism doesn't exist, or how, or like they get into an argument where they're like, well, here's the thing with the death penalty though, they see that and they're like, wait a second, that doesn't seem congruent. That doesn't seem right. And like issues of dignity of life, and for some young people, the treatment of the incarcerated, for some for many young people, racism as an issue. Like these are things that they also want to know, well, what do you think about that? Tell me what you think about this issue. And I think that's where we can talk about the dignity of human life, why there is often an emphasis on abortion as vulnerable life, as how destructive that is, as it's the termination, the murder of a human life. And then we can talk about these other things. But I think what happens is when our politics align, and that's driving things, we can't speak eloquently about the beauty of Catholic social teaching about the pro-life message. And then teenagers see that as inauthentic. They're like, well, you are a one issue person. And that's what this side's been telling me the whole time.
Yeah. I think they're also very good at spotting the hypocrites, which I remember being in high school when some of my core members, as like in Life Teen, were doing questionable things. Like I was like, wait a second, but you gave me that talk, and like what? And so I think that teenagers are much more perceptive than a lot of people give them credit for, and I think that you're absolutely right. I think one of the challenges also that I have seen in my former teens is a little bit of apathy. I have literally been told, like, what's the point? They're not going to change their minds. And also just the incredible fear of rejection. You touched on that too, where it's going to be so much harder for teens to be pro-life in this culture, in this environment now. So what key moments do we need to prepare teenagers and young adults for as they engage in conversations about pro-life issues, especially abortion?
Yeah. I think the one key moment is we need to prepare them for the moment when a friend, family member says, I'm going to go get an abortion. Like, and again, when I do this, when I speak to young men, anytime I give a men's talk, um, as long as it's not completely out of left field, where it's like, wow, you're just forcing that in. I talk about abortion and I talk about racism. And I talk about those two things because I think for young men, they need to know how they stand up for the dignity of those around them. And as I talk about abortion, I note that you're going to have a moment, many of you, where a friend, a family member, whatever, says, I'm going to do this. And like in that moment, you need to be compassionate. You need to commit to walking with that person. And I think that's the moment, one of the key moments we have to train both young men and women for is like, what do you do when a friend says this? Because their instinct is going to be, I want to support my friend. And who am I to tell them what to do?
Mm-hmm.
But if you can give them like, okay, here's how you find the tools and the resources. Here's how you locate a crisis pregnancy center. Here's what you say and what you don't say. Here's how you commit to being present. And here's oftentimes what that young woman is feeling and what she's hearing and how you can speak into that with compassion. But compassion demands truth and justice. I still have to speak truth to you. And I have to make sure that we remain in right relationship, with you, with the Lord, with this child. I had a young man after I gave a talk like that a couple of years ago, send me a message and he was like, that happened. He's like, that situation. And, I did those things. And then the next picture was a picture of the friend, not his girlfriend, just a friend with her baby. And he's like, and I'm like, but that's a 19-year-old guy at the time who was ready for the moment, who had fixed in his head, who had kind of dispelled the lie. So I think another key moment for young men is like how to respond when somebody says, this isn't your argument. You have no say in the matter, how they can articulate why that's not true. And work through that argument. So he knew that this was his place to defend life, both his friend and her unborn child. And I think that it was beautiful. But I think we don't talk about those things. We kind of say, hey, like this is important, but we don't give people the talking points of the argument. So I think the moment somebody says they're going to have an abortion, for young men in particular, the moment somebody tries to present the argument, this isn't your choice because you're not a woman. And then I think just when they get into academia and spaces of higher education, like teaching them, here's how you have a full philosophical argument. And here's some of the things you're going to hear and why those are not good arguments, even just shutting down the most basic things. Because they're going to have that moment, and to be able to not get flustered and speak articulately could actually be a moment of conversion for other people. Because if they're like, hey, like, well, why don't we talk about this? Like, let's find where we both stand as far as our values. And then let's dig into that a little bit and figure out how we can maybe come to understand one another. And when young people can do that, there is a chance that you can convert hearts. And somebody might say, wait a second, I haven't really thought about things that way.
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to thank you for including that in your guy sessions, because it just, I feel so bad for all men, really, because they're just being told by the media or the left that it's not their conversation to have, and how are especially fathers supposed to feel about that if their girlfriend or wife is pregnant. I have an episode with Father Kurt Pereira about healing ministry and about healing that needs to happen for men. So I just think that's really great that you include that. Shameless plug. Life Choices is also starting a leadership group for teens, and I'm a philosophy and English nerd, so we're going to go through all the arguments, and I love teaching about logical fallacies. I've taught a couple semesters on logical fallacies just so that they could have those arguments, and then I make them do debates, and we're going to do debates in this group to try to prepare them for those conversations. But did you get a little teary-eyed when you saw the babies? I feel like you had to have a praise God moment.
I did. Well, and I was inspired because I'm like that, as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old man, like that's a scary thing to do. And like that guy stepped up. And so I was like, wow, like I need it convicted me where I'm like, man, I got to pray for fortitude. Because, and again, I always note that it wasn't his girlfriend, because I'm like that it's a whole different level. Like this isn't his baby. This is a guy who's like, no, I'll stand with you. I'll stand with you in this to the end. He's like, I was there at the hospital. I'm like, oh God. Like, right? But I mean, like, what happens if you train young people in that type of compassion?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it happens through even, like, again, the philosophy, the formation,
Yeah.
and not underestimating that this is a thread that can actually unravel people's faith if this one goes, because they're like, well, if the church is wrong about that, what else?
Or if they're being hypocritical or
Right?
inauthentic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we mentioned, a lot of youth ministers, parents, maybe teachers will be listening to this. How can we all really continue to grow in our understanding of life issues? And what are a couple of habits that you think are just non-negotiable for a pro-life leader?
Yeah, I think a couple of things are: one, to know the arguments, the philosophical grounding of these things yourself well enough to articulate them and teach them. These are not talking points you see on Twitter or even in the news. That's the first thing. The second skill is to learn how to, and to teach others how to, drill down onto primary sources from news articles, even if they're news articles that agree with what you're saying. And you're like, oh, like, that's a cool pro-life article. Cool. Look, like, what are the primary sources? Because you want to cite those things and know, if a study comes out saying X, Y, or Z, well, why does it say that?
Mm-hmm.
And just to do that with any news is a good habit to be in. I think in understanding how the church's teaching applies to all life issues, and how we can teach and navigate those conversations as well. Because, like I said, if you're very articulate with abortion, that's very important. But there are other issues teens are going to ask you about to test your consistency. Well, tell me what you think about this. Tell me what you think about this thing that happened, about this school shooting. Tell me what you think about this black man that was shot, by police. Tell me what you think about that. And those are sometimes conversations we're uncomfortable with, because, like, ooh, I haven't done that work. But we need to do that work, because for teenagers, they're not asked, they want to know what you think and they want to learn, but they're also testing you to see, are you consistent? Because, like, this thing is an injustice. They know that, but they're like, do you think it's an injustice? And sometimes if we haven't done the work there, or like euthanasia is another one, the death penalty, if we haven't done the research there, then we resort to, like, talking points to our preferred political party. And that is not always, that's not a good thing.
They'll see through it.
They'll see through that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that, and just to stay prayed up. And, like you said, not to be hypocritical, to recognize that our holiness, we have to shine before others. And in doing so, like, to live that joy, to show compassion, they'll know us by our fruits. And I think as you see the vitriol from other people, and another side of this, I think, again, teens will start to see the contrast of, like, wait a second, that doesn't seem right. So live compassion, live joy. And I think that, by their fruits you will know them.
I think additionally, one of your favorite topics, you have to be humble, especially when you're asked a question and you might not know the answer because you haven't done the work. It goes a long way with teens to say, good question. Let me go do my research. Let me get back to you, even, because I think that they appreciate that you're not just trying to spitball an answer that might not actually be accurate, or the best argument or a good representation of what we believe. Yeah.
And there's an affirmation in there too, right? To say to a teen, that's a really great question. What a smart question to think of. And it's such a good question that I'm gonna have to dig a little bit on that. And, like, you say that to a teenager, they're not going to be like, oh, this, whatever. They're going to be like, wow, like, I thought of a good question. And they're actually going to go do the work to figure that out, because it was such a good question. Like, that's a win-win all the way around. But you're right. It doesn't happen without humility.
And they care about me enough to actually go research and come back to me. Like, they're going to remember me, which I think goes obviously a long way. So my last question, where have you seen God, especially in the past few weeks in the pro-life movement?
I really think it is in a lot of the young people who are passionate about this. And again, even encountering them at events, there are people who ask really good questions, whose hearts are again, compassionate for people who need some direction. And then there are young people who are like, have hit the point where it's like, well, this is just unfathomable that people are even opposed to this decision. And I'm like, praise God. Like, that's, and again, there's still compassion where they're like, yeah, like, I'm not hating on anybody, but where they're like, no, like, I've accepted that this is wrong and we have to do something about it. And I think that I've just encountered more teenagers like that. And I'm like, okay, there's something very hopeful about that.
Praise God. Well, Joel, where can we follow you on social media or get your book, you've got multiple books, where can we find all of your fantastic content? I was just telling Joel before we started that he's just been posting some really great content on Instagram. So can you share us your handles, all that good stuff?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Chasing Humility, on Twitter at Chasing Humility as well. I have a friend who's trying to convince me to get a TikTok account. I don't know about that, but if I do, it'll probably be Chasing Humility. But at Chasing Humility is where you can find me, or my website, joelstepanek.com. If you're interested in serving together and bring me out to speak and talk about any number of things, you can shoot me a message there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all of your wonderful things that you had to say. And thank you for spending the time to talk to me on this podcast. I'm sure all of our listeners are really appreciative as well.
It was a gift. Thanks for having me, Sammie.
No problem.
Thank you. Bye.